With the blessings of His Holiness Jagat Guru Sri Shivaratri Deshikendra Mahaswamigalu, a very good morning once again to the invited guests, speakers, students, ladies and gentlemen. I, Dr. Chanchala, on behalf of the organizing committee, take this as an immense pride to welcome each and everyone to today's session of the webinar, Professional Excellence and Excel Series. To improve the golden moment of opportunity and catch the good that is in our reach is a great art of life. So, amidst the pandemic, let's take this webinar as an opportunity to enhance our knowledge and update ourselves on various aspects of life too. So, we head start with the presentations for today. Before the presentation by Dr. Praveen Kulkarni, there are a few MCQs posted. I request the participants to kindly fill in them.
Dear participants, the MCQs will be visible on your screen right now.
So we have with us today Dr. Praveen Kulkarni as the first speaker for today. In the meantime, we'll have the introduction for Dr. Praveen Kulkarni. Dr. Praveen Kulkarni is serving as an Associate Professor, Department of Community Medicine, JSS Medical College and Hospital. Dr. Praveen has been a Fellow of Foundation for Advancements in International Medical Education and Research, has received grants from Government of India, Indian Council of Medical Research, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, has been a recipient of Young Scientist Award and as a Best Reviewer Award too. He's been a recipient of Best Teacher Award from JSS Academy of Higher Education and Research and Elite Gold Medal in the NPTEL course ICMR and IIT Kharagpur. Innumerable laurels to his credit, I must say. So we welcome you, Dr. Praveen, to today's webinar series.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, sir. And we have with us Dr. Priyanka Nitin from Department of Oral Pathology and Microbiology, JSS Dental College and Hospital, as a reflection panelist for this session. Dr. Priyanka has about 9 years of teaching experience in the field of oral pathology, has been the recipient of Young Researcher Award at the Global Cancer Summit 2020. Thank you for being with us today, Dr. Priyanka. We welcome you.
Thank you, Chanchala.
Have the MCQs been filled? Can we move ahead with the presentation?
Yes, ma'am. The MCQs will be posted later, so we can proceed. No problem.
Thank you, Sumukh. Moving on to the first presentation for today. Over to you, Dr. Praveen. The platform is all yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, ma'am. At the outset, I would like to thank JSS Dental College for giving me an opportunity to share my some amount of knowledge and experience related to the publication ethics. I would like to thank Dr. Bhagyalakshmi and Dr. Ashwini for helping me and cooperating with all their support in channelizing my presentation and also organizing the thoughts as well as helping me with some sort of organization. Thank you to both of you, and I would like to also thank Dr. Priyanka Nitin for being a reflective panelist for the session, and all my teachers and faculty, and also all dear participants. Today we are going to discuss about few aspects of publication ethics. Publication ethics is a very broad topic. It is a science in itself. So all of us need to know some essential aspects of publication ethics, because we are all not only the teachers or academicians, we are also the researchers, because it is our responsibility to give quality and ethical information related to the science to the entire universe. Because if we think we are doing a publication and we are keeping quiet, it is not like that, because our publication is being reviewed, is being read, is being practiced, is being critically appraised by people throughout the world. That is the reason whatever we want to give to the community or we want to give to the scientific world, it should be of great ethical quality. Considering these components, today I am going to talk about few aspects of publication ethics. Yeah, in today's session, we'll be discussing about what are various ethical aspects associated with scientific communications or publications. And second, we'll try to describe the tools and techniques to prevent the breach in ethical aspects of publication. So first of all, let me start with the basics. Why exactly we need to publish? We have multiple answers. I think you are going to give so many answers related to it. I don't want to discuss about it more in detail, but all of us will publish for the reason that we want to have research excellence. This program is basically designed for professional excellence, right? And research excellence is a part of professional excellence. We want to excel in our profession. We want to show that we are professionally competent. We are competent with respect to research. To achieve the professional excellence and research excellence, we publish the research. Second reason, to advance professionally. For example, there are some faculty in the dental college. They are all known for their professional qualities. They have an area of professional interest. It could be anything. It could be related to the innovations in dental materials. It could be innovations in pediatric dentistry. It could be innovation related to the treatment aspects. You have plenty of people who have excelled in that area. And how do we say a person is excelled in that area? It is because they would have done some work, published it, and made to the world know that they are professionally sound in that particular area. To achieve that, we publish our research work by doing actual research and contributing to the findings. Next is to qualify for the grants. Whenever we apply for the funding agencies, when we apply proposals, when we send our proposals to the funding agencies, the first filter they are going to put is whether this person who has applied for the grant has done any homework or basic professional competency related to that particular area. For example, if I submit a proposal for a research on geriatric nutrition, the person who is reviewing it, the funding agency which is reviewing it, they're going to have a look at my professional work or research work related to geriatric nutrition and check whether I have some publications, some research projects related to it. If I have publications and projects, then there is higher chance that my grant will be accepted. Usually when we are writing, I think all of you have that idea, whenever we are writing our grant proposals, there will be a separate section whether expertise in the proposed research area. What determines the expertise in the defined research area is the publications that we come out. And I was attending one of the project review board meetings of DBT, which was held in JSS Medical College itself, I think 4 or 5 years back, as one of the observer. That time, when the reviewers were reviewing the projects, they were simultaneously looking at that particular person's publications related to that area. One of the panelists in that particular team, he was actually asking the question, not only related to the publication, but also related to the journal to which the article has been submitted and article has been published. He was telling to one of the research proposer and investigator, you have done a wonderful research, but you have submitted this paper to a journal which is considered as a predatory. And it is more of a discredit to your work rather than credit. This is all the reason why we need to talk about the publication ethics. And next important thing is prestige. If we have publications in good quality journals with high impact factor, it is not only publication, prestige to ourselves, it is a prestige to the institution also. As I was making a point, most of the accrediting agencies, they are all asking now for the quality publications, and quality publications in terms of the impact factor, in terms of the journal reach, the citation, all those things are now becoming mandatory, not only for accreditation, but for the ranking agencies of the institutions also. And we publish to contribute to our field and to contribute to the community. And more importantly, the publication yields scientific, personal satisfaction and personal development. I do not want to tell repeat that publications are required for promotions. It is embedded in two components here. One is professional advancement and professional development. publications are required for the promotion aspects also. And all these things yield the personal as well as professional satisfaction. Now, what is publication ethics? The publication ethics is defined as there should be ethical standards for publication that should ensure high quality scientific publications. And second, most importantly, public trust in scientific findings. Nowadays, you're seeing so many treatment options coming for COVID-19. So many preventive aspects are being proposed. And every time some new drug, some new treatment aspect comes, the first question we ask whether there is an evidence for it. It could be anything. It can start from Covax, Covishield vaccine to 2DG drug that is being available. What as a scientist I want to check is whether there are evidences associated with it, whether the papers are published and whether the papers are of great quality, whether they are scientifically sound, and whether I can trust that particular medication. It is all dependent on the publication ethics. Whatever research we give, it should have high quality standards with respect to ethics, and also it should have public trust in scientific findings. And it should, because if it is my idea, I have to receive credit for it. If it is somebody's idea, they have to receive credit for it. That is a part of publication ethics. So researchers, authors, sponsors, editors, publishers, all of us have ethical obligations. And it is nothing like I am the author, only I have obligations. No. It is everyone, starting from an author, reviewer, sponsor, then editor, editorial board. All of us have some sort of, obligations to follow in ensuring publication ethics. And before we proceed further, we will discuss about what is scientific misconduct. I took this definition from US Office of Research Integrity. They say scientific misconduct includes fabrication, falsification, plagiarism in not only the publications, it is in proposing, performing, or reviewing research, and also in reporting of research results. It is not only the publication we write has to do with the publication ethics. It is the process of conducting the research and how we execute our research idea and how exactly we write the research paper, how it is reviewed and how it is published. All these things have got, something to do with publication ethics, and misconduct can occur at any point in these times. And, this, paper published in Lancet, it was it looked very exciting to me to present. Scientific misconduct is a continuum ranging from honest errors to the outright fraud. What are these honest errors and outright fraud? We will discuss a bit later in the presentation. So scientific misconducts occur. They are bound to occur. But those misconducts can be just because of chance. Sometimes they can be real fraud. And it is our responsibility as a reviewers, editors, to check whether the error is because of the simple errors or chance, or it is because of scientific misconduct, a real scientific misconduct or a fraud. So why are we so concerned about publication ethics? It has got wider range of impact. If we publish an unethical paper, it can have a lot of consequences on the scientific community. For example, if we publish papers of low standard, low quality ethics, then it has got larger impact on our journal itself. People start, neglecting that particular journal. They will stop trusting that particular journal. And the citations will come down, the submissions will come down, the review process will not take place. The journal will lose its moral. So that is the reason publication ethics is so important. And second is it may damage careers of some innocent collaborators. For example, I am doing a research and I have collaborated with 10 different agencies. And I published a paper with lot of misconceptions, I had some preoccupied ideas, I have collaborators, but I put, without actual finding of the research, I put my own ideas and published the paper, and someone found it scientific misconduct. That time it is not only my image that is going to go, it is the image of all other collaborators who are not aware of my misconduct will also suffer from the consequences. And second is, it will damage the institution's reputations. We have seen many instances where misconducts are done, and the first thing that we usually find out if the misconducts occur from an author, he is from which institution. It is directly going to affect the institution's reputations. I have been working with 4 or 5 journals as editorial board member, and we found 2-3 instances of scientific misconduct, especially the fabrication and the conflict of interest. And we are now scanning every paper which is submitted from that institution by 3 different reviewers, for the reason that there can be a chance of misconduct. So we are not only labeling ourselves as unethical, we are labeling our institutions, our entire research setup as non-unethical practices. And more importantly, it is corruption of evidence base. Everything in the world now works on evidence-based medicine. If we do misconduct, it is not only damage to the evidence, it is called as corruption to the evidence base. And most importantly, it is a waste of time, effort, and funds if we do misconduct. And it could be a problem to the research participants also. If we do unethical research, it may directly harm the research participants. It is a part of research activity, the research process, and it may harm the general public also, because usually whatever we give as a research publication, the outcome, the treatment outcome, it could be a drug, it could be a medicine, all these things, if they come directly into the market based on a fraudulent research, it may end up in problem to the general public. They may suffer from the consequences related to that particular drug or a dosage or a medicine, whatever we can, or a vaccine we can think of. And future research and funding may be misdirected. So these are all the consequences for which we really need to bother about publication ethics. Now, who can conduct scientific misconduct? Number one, it is majority of the times, the misconducts occur from author's point of view, author's side. It could be anything, could be fabrication, falsification, or it could be conflict of interest, or it could be plagiarism. All these things are not taking ethics committee approvals. So this can occur from the author side, majority of the times. And sometimes it can occur from the reviewer side also. The major thing that occurs from reviewer side is they may have conflict of interest, and they have downloaded some papers which have come for the review, and they may write their own papers using those research ideas. We call it as stealing of research ideas. That can occur from the reviewer's point of view, or it can be favoring. He is a known author to me and I'm going to favor him. So these kind of problems can occur from the reviewers, or sometimes it could be from editors. What unethical practices can occur from editor's point of view? They will not publish the ideas, the findings which are not in line with the current practices. We call it as publication bias. If there is an association between, a strong correlation between physical exercise and BMI, and in one of the paper it was not statistically significant, then editor will not try to publish that particular paper. So it is called as a publication bias. And sometimes they may withhold publication for a long time. And sometimes they may not communicate the review findings to the authors. So these are all few problems associated with editors which are considered as unethical. Sometimes the funding agencies may also interfere with the publication results. So they can also contribute to the scientific misconduct because they have put money and they want results according to their requirement, especially the clinical trials. I was reading one of the very interesting paper where an author had written most of the trial results are based on the preoccupied notions of the funding agencies. But most of the time, nowadays, because of exhaustive review processes, peer review processes, and the journals maintaining the COPE standards, they are not allowing the grant agencies to interfere with the results and research findings. So, but still at some point in time, they can also contribute to the unethical practices. And sometimes the publishers may also contribute to unethical practices like delaying the publications, withholding the publications, and not collecting the conflict of interest, contributor forms, and not taking the copyright forms from the authors. If there are photos published, not taking the consent form from the authors. So few things related to the publishers also. So I think you can now imagine publication. Till now, most of us may be thinking publication ethics need to be followed only by the author. It is not. Publication ethics should be followed by all spectrum of people, starting from the funding agency, reviewer, editor, publisher, everyone. Now, what are the components of publication ethics? The first one is ethics review and breach in confidentiality. Second could be fabrication and falsification. Third is there could be problems associated with authorship, which is the most common problem, and problems associated with the plagiarism, the ethics related to submission, and conflict of interest. These are the 6 components which I want to present in today's session. Number 1, the commonest review we get or we give to the papers which are submitted to us is, please provide the ethics committee approval for this particular research. And we get tremendously different and crazy replies from the authors. This is a retrospective study, so ethics approval is not required. And this is a case study, ethics approval is not required. It is a record-based analysis, ethics approval is not required. It is an observational study, ethics committee is not required. It is just a survey study, ethics committee is not required. It is not. Any outcome you want to give to the scientific community, anything research that takes place should be brought to the notice of institutional ethics committees. It is left to the prerogative of ethics committee to decide whether this requires complete review or it may require waiver. But it should be brought to the ethics committee notice. And most importantly, it should be very clearly mentioned in the methodology section of the paper. This particular research was reviewed by institutional ethics committee and it has either given approval or it has given waiver. So there was a long conversation took place between me and one of the author when I had been a reviewer for a journal. It took place almost for 6 months. He was so adamant that he did not want to yield and submit ethics committee approval. This was for one of the retrospective analysis. I clearly told him this ethics committee approval has to be submitted. He told it is not required. I asked for document for it supporting. Then he replied he took some paper published somewhere in some journal which is neither available on Google Scholar nor available in any of the search engines, and he posted me one sentence that this study does not require ethics committee approval. That was published almost in 1996-98. And I had to send him ICMR guidelines. I had to send him IGCMA guidelines. And he was clearly not of any opinion that they have to submit ethics committee approval. This fight took on since, for almost, he was not leaving, I was also not leaving. And because I knew that what I'm doing was right. And finally, he had to yield and submit the waiver report from institutional ethics committee, because it is required to me later on the publications, because I'm a reviewer for some research finding from an institution and he is an author, he has submitted some research, and later on if the institution was not happy with the findings of that particular paper and it has got its conflict of interest, and if they want to raise any concern, then who will be caught hold of? Reviewer, author, as well as a paper. So we need to have very clear idea about what we are doing. And more importantly, informed consent has to be mentioned. We have to take informed consent and it should be explicitly mentioned in the paper. And CTRI registrations. Lot of time we ask the authors, send CTRI because they mention clinical trial conducted on this drug and this drug, and CTRI registration number will not be there. And we ask for it and they say it was not registered. It is again an important practice that we need to keep in mind, because CTRI and DCGI are regulatory bodies. And if we do not comply to their requirements, again, it is not going to come into the ethical purview of any publication. And whether research was conducted using ICH GCP guidelines, good clinical practice, International Committee of Harmonization and good clinical practices, whether research was conducted using these components or not, all these are reviewed by the ethics committees. That is the reason I have mentioned it as ethical review. And more importantly, data confidentiality. I cannot publish anything from JSS Hospital or JSS Dental College and Hospital unless I take permission from the authorities of JSS Hospital or JSS Dental College for publishing this research work. If this is not there, then the research is going to be, there is going to be a breach in confidentiality. And now next, coming to a very important component, what we call as fabrication. What do you mean by fabrication? Fabrication is construction or addition of data, observations or characterizations that never occurred in gathering of data. So sometimes what happens is the students say, my sample size was 200 and I could collect only 50 participants. Can I do it 50 into 4? Copying and pasting the same things. So this is called as fabrication. And in fabrication, sometimes the data is completely cooked up. There is absolutely no data. This author has not collected the data at all and completely cooking up the whole information using the knowledge that is already available in the scientific community. These are called as fabrication, where fabrication can be of two types. One is completely cooking up the data, and second thing is they have collected some data and they have multiplied it or manipulated it. We call it as data fabrication. It is considered as the most heinous crime and most unscientific activity. Okay. And second most important thing is a falsification. And in falsification, the author wants to prove his results. They're already aware what is the result of their particular study, because they want to have that particular result only. And in that context, they change the data set, or they change the, they change the results, observations based on their own hypothesis, their own preoccupied notions. This is a common thing we get. Students will, most of them postgraduates will come and ask, sir, actually, while collecting the data, this has happened, but there is no statistical significance. But, a lot of people in my department now, they are asking, there should be statistical significance, sir. Can we make it statistically significant by changing the numbers? So this is called as falsification. In falsification, author has collected the data. The basic difference between fabrication and falsification is, in fabrication, we question the collection of data itself. And in falsification, author has collected the data, but manipulated it at the time of analysis to make it suitable for his hypothesis and his preoccupied notions. We call it as falsification. Okay, so like manipulating the numbers for statistical significance. I think the chat box is open now. I have two questions to you. You can just answer them in the chat box. The first question is a final year, just to differentiate between falsification and fabrication. I think you can answer to this in the chat box. So yeah, a final year postgraduate student came to me and requesting for analysis of his thesis data. He also asked if I could make some significant results, though they were not initially so. So what is this? Is it falsification or fabrication? Great. Yes, it is simple. It is falsification. So here, author has collected the data, but they want it to be statistically significant. So there is a lot of, people think that statistical significance is something great they want to achieve at the end of their research. So this is a major breach in ethical standards. Okay, so as all of you answered, it is a falsification. Now, the second part is, curiously, I asked how he has collected the data. To my surprise, he revealed that the data was taken from his senior's thesis. So what is it? Is it what exactly you mean by this? Is it a falsification or fabrication? Yes. Perfect. I think you know what is the difference between fabrication and falsification. So both of these are considered to be heinous crimes in any type of research. Great. Thanks for all your replies. This was one of a major outburst in the entire scientific community, where a very senior professor had fabricated the findings of the research in one of the international universities, and this was related to the stem cell research, which was published in a very high impact journal, and later on, and it was led by a Nobel laureate, and later on this whole publication was retrieved back. It was such a huge embarrassment to the institution, to the scientists, and to the entire nation. So the fabrication has got very bad implications. So if we are found, we are going to be, it is a kind of professional death sentence in research activities. Please keep that thing in your mind when you are actually thinking of fabrication or falsification. So how do we can detect these frauds by a very strict peer review. If the peer reviewers are very intelligent, they can easily detect it. But what is the problem associated with it? Sometimes we may not get the very good quality reviewers, and skilled reviewers are quite busy with their activities. And we get so many papers from different journals, and it is difficult to catch hold of them, but try to find out. Usually when we get the papers for publication, in our journals, what we do is we are going to type the same title in the Google Scholar or in PubMed, and we try to find out an author who has done maximum work in that particular area, and we send the papers to them for review. So in that context, the person, if he is having so much of idea about a particular research topic, if there are any frauds or fabrications, they can easily detect it. And second thing is reliability of these studies, replicating the similar kind of studies elsewhere to check whether the results are consistent or not. Sometimes this is also going to be difficult because duplicating the research activities after they get published by due acknowledgement is also a problem, because we have scarcity of funding. We may have sometimes studies are of large scale, large time, difficult to conduct. And one important thing is to encourage whistleblowers. Whistleblowers are someone who are having an idea about different research activities. And if there is a fraud, if there is a problem, they will be having very clear idea about to detect the fabrications, falsification, plagiarism and all. If we encourage such kind of people, I think it is a wonderful idea. But these ideas are not very well implemented across the world. And another very important problem we get with respect to the publication ethics is related to authorship. Authorship confers credit and implies responsibility and accountability to published work. I think all of us, when we are submitting the paper, at the end of the contributor form, there will be something called guarantor. Guarantor is someone who is completely responsible for entire research activity, findings and publication. It doesn't mean that only he is a guarantor. As I told, there are multiple guarantors, but he is the first person to contact if there is any problem. He is the first one to get the credit as well as if there is any problem to get. It is like both carrot and stick. And each author should be clear about their responsibility. If you look at any journals where Medno publishers, or it could be Water Kluwer, what we call now them as, it could be editorial managers, anywhere, every person's responsibilities are very clearly depicted. And we should be clear about what is my contribution to this paper. And more importantly, it is mandatory to declare the contribution of each of the authors. Sometime in the paper itself, there will be a section, contribution of each of the author. This person did this person did this. But sometime because of paucity of space and all, they will be taking it at the time of submission, what was done by this particular person. And we have to decide on authorship at the time of writing research protocol itself. We have practiced it multiple times, so it is going to give a lot of satisfaction to the author panel also. And if we are very clear about who is going to be which sequence of author, it is always good, because later on they will not raise their conflict of interest. And we have International Committee of Medical Journal Editors. They have brought in 4 criteria to decide the authorship sequence. Author should have substantial contribution to the conception, design of the work, or acquisition of data, analysis of data, and interpretation of data. And he should have contribution towards drafting the work or revisiting it critically for important intellectual content. And final approval of the version to be published. I think you may recollect, when you are submitting the paper, there will be a box that will be displayed where you are going to put a tick, what was done by whom, and agreement to be accountable for all aspects of work, which is very important in ensuring that the questions related to the accuracy or integrity of any part of the work are appropriately investigated and resolved. So these are the 4 criteria that are set up. All the journals are following these criteria. They have made different tables where tick and selecting, clicking, such things are there. So we can definitely work on these components. And we have some problems with the authorship also. There's something called as ghost authorship. So person is absolutely not involved in any research activities. And when you see the paper, his name is there in that. It is called as ghost authorship. The person has not at all involved in any research activities, and his name, if it is included, it is called as ghost authorship. It can happen for multiple reasons. Let me not quote them here. Second is called as polyauthoritis giftosa. It is nothing but, if a paper goes from my department, if some department A, department B, department C, so we gift the authorship to the people whom we find are very close to us. It is kind of a gifting of authorship. They might have not got involved in any of the research activities in the entire process which I told. He may not have involved or she may not have involved in it, but it is kind of a gifting authorship. When I write paper, you give me authorship. When you write the paper, you need to give me authorship. It is something called as I scratch your back, you scratch my back. This is called as polyauthoritis giftosa. This is something like, they might have not contributed. If sometime later, people face a lot of embarrassment to this. And people, when paper gets published somewhere, and if an author wants to know something about that particular paper, and if they reply through the LinkedIn or through the ResearchGate to this person who is a gifted author, what is the meaning of this particular part of this paper, then this person will not be having any idea about what it is. Okay, so these kind of things will actually harm the people who have actually given their time and energy to the publications. And mandatory authorship to the people in authority is another important thing that they're practiced in many institutions. So it needs to be really checked and found out. Hierarchical authorship. So authorship has to be based on the substantial contribution towards that particular research activity. So hierarchical authorship is nothing but based on the seniority. We decide the sequence of authorship. That is something which is again unethical and ignoring the baseline contributors. For example, this happens quite a lot of times nowadays, sometimes because of ignorance, because of chance. So our PGs will complete their dissertation and they will leave the departments. This used to occur before. Now I think to a substantial extent it has come down. PGs will write the papers and submit their dissertations. They go and join some institutions, and teachers or their mentors, they want to publish that particular paper, and they take the content and they write their publication, and sometimes the PG's name would have been placed at the last authorship, or it could be completely ignored. Such kind of things, and PG will eventually look at that particular paper in some journal and bound back to the institution or to the author that my actual work was published by someone, published by my mentor, without acknowledging me into the paper. So sometimes it is difficult, and you may think of asking the question, if a postgraduate does a dissertation and a paper comes out of it, who should be the first author? So it is again the contribution. You need to go with those 4 components. Who was the conceptualizer? Who collected the data? Who analyzed the data? Who interpreted the data? Who wrote the paper? Who reviewed the paper? Who did the final checking of the paper? And who contributed to the design of the study? So all these things you rate it, and the one who qualifies higher give the authorship. Now a simple solution most of the institutions found out, from each dissertation they may come out with 2 papers. And in first paper, the mentor will be the first author and the student will be the corresponding author. And in second paper, it is vice versa. That kind of thing could be easily made out, but only if those paper, that particular dissertation is worth publishing with 2 different papers. If there are common findings, then it should be completely avoided. And related to submissions, one we have something called a simultaneous submission, submitting the same manuscript simultaneously to different journals. Now there is a lot of pressure on publishing the papers faster. So some journals keep long time for the entire process. So let me send paper to 10 different journals at a time, and whichever replies back to be faster, I will process with that. So that is a wrong thing. That is a improper publication ethics. And second thing is duplicate publications. We see a lot of these things, a lot of people getting indulged in this. The same paper with a different title is published in some other journal. You read the entire paper, everything remains same. We have found out quite a few with our journal also. Entire thing remains same. Only the title is different, author sequence is different, the same paper is published in multiple journals. And sometime, we try to find out the simultaneous submissions and publications when we do our peer review process for the journal. And when it crosses 3 months, 4 months for the reviewers to reply and then authors to re-reply for that, all these things. During that time, when we are actually finalizing the paper, for curiosity, we take the title and put it in the Google. Same paper would have got published in some other journal. Same paper. And we reject the paper stating that this paper has already been published in this particular journal. Do not indulge in these kind of practices anywhere. And another problem is self-citation. We cite our own papers. I was discussing with with our PGs, one of the paper that was submitted to one of the very reputed journals. When we look at the references, quite a lot of times reviewers do not look at it. When we looked at the citations, when we looked at the reference list, out of 15 references that author has cited, 9 were of his own. This is called as self-citation, citing our own papers. This is, again, breach in ethics. And finally, predatory journals. These are the journals which do not follow a strict peer review process. And coming to the next aspect, which is called as plagiarism, use of previously published manuscript by someone for his or her manuscript, unreferenced use of others' published and unpublished ideas without consent, credit, or acknowledgement. This looks a bit complicated definition. It in a very simple term, copying and pasting from some other research paper without giving credit to it, credit to the original author. So most common form of plagiarism is copy-paste, and it is considered as a serious professional and publication misconduct. So there can be something called as direct plagiarism, where we take copy and paste the same paragraph from some different journal without acknowledging the original author. And another thing, as I told, self-plagiarism, where we try to put our own things there. If you put 1 or 2 papers, there is absolutely no problem. There are some journals which have fixed the number of self-citations that has to be placed. Less than 5% of the total references should be of the same author. Something like that. So self-plagiarism is citing from my own paper multiple times. And redundant publication, we call it as salami slicing. For example, what is salami slicing is we do a research and there are 2 objectives in that. Both of them are interrelated. So I publish 2, 3, 4 papers out of the same thesis, and results all remain same, methodology remains same, only the title and few other components are different. We call it as salami publications. And how do we avoid plagiarism? We have to avoid copy paste. We have to spend a lot of time in doing the writing the paper. We have to paraphrase the sentences. Sometimes it is difficult. I had faced a problem with this particular component. I used to write a lot of papers on rabies, and the first line or first paragraph related to rabies is fatal but 100% fatal but 100% preventable disease. There are 1.96 million animal bites take place every year, and around 20,000 human rabies deaths occur every year in the country. This sentence is constant in most of the papers related to rabies. And the reviewer has raised a concern. You are doing a plagiarism. So it will be difficult to change these sentences, but we had to change it. And there are some standards fixed for these continuous words. The UGC standard is the similarity index should be less than 10% and the total continuous words should be less than 14. This is a standard that is fixed by UGC and also JSS Academy of Higher Education and Research. And please give reference accurately. We have to give reference to the components we take. Do not copy paste and give references. The common question is, I will copy and paste, but I'll give reference, I'll cite the reference number. It is not correct. You need to paraphrase it. And avoid writing several articles of the same kind. And there are many plagiarism softwares that are available. Urkund is one which is being used now by our university. Turnitin is also being used. There are many other softwares that you can definitely use. And conflict of interest is another important thing. It could be related to the financial, personal, social, other interests that will directly or indirectly influence conduct of research by an author. It could be related to my wife is having promotion. She is eligible for promotion, but papers are not there. When I'm writing a paper, I'll give an authorship to my wife also. It is something called as a conflict of interest. Maybe she is not involved in entire research activity. And it could be related to the funding. If they have actually contributed in any of these processes, you can definitely give them authorship or acknowledge them. But if it is not, then it is a conflict of interest. Sometimes the funding agencies, we manipulate the results according to the requirements of funding agencies. It is again a conflict of interest. I am the person who is involved with both funding agency and also I am the principal investigator of the project. It is a conflict of interest. I am author of a paper and I am the reviewer for the same paper. Conflict of interest. I am author for the same paper and I am editorial board member of that particular journal and I am reviewing the paper. I am taking final decision about the paper. It is a conflict of interest. You have multiple conflict of interest that we need to check and we need to really disclose the conflict of interest. And readers can determine the influence of such conflict of interest on the conclusion of the paper. It can be detected any point in time. Let me come to the last few slides of my presentation. So as a community medicine person, we are all public health people. We are more bothered about the prevalence and incidences. So coming to the epidemiology of publication ethics, the common consistent major problems related to the publication ethics are authorship and plagiarism. These are evergreen problems associated with publication ethics. And high but decreasing are questionable or unethical research thanks to the ethics committees of different institutions, ICMR and other organizations who are constantly working on ethical aspects of research. These are few things that are coming down, but still they're high in incidence. And new but increasing are conflict of interest and peer review. Sometimes, reviewers, authors suggest the reviewers who are very close to them, and journals send the papers to those reviewers and they get review process done for a faster publication. This is another important problem that we always face. These things are increasing now because we need to have faster publications. we need to have faster, because journals also want the faster publications. The conflict of interest and peer review related problems are becoming more. We have seen a lot of journals, you submit the paper today, tomorrow, day after tomorrow, you will get an approval. Oh, wonderful, in 2 days I got approval. Newspaper articles also take 4 or 5 days to get approved. But these papers, scientific papers, submitted today, tomorrow accepted. So these are the problems. The papers will not undergo peer review. We have seen some papers undergoing peer review, but the quality of reviews are all not very good. So keeping these things in mind, these problems are becoming more and more. It could be social pressure, academic pressure, institutional pressures. Because of that, people indulge in conflict of interest. There are multiple stories I can tell. Because of paucity of time, I'm not going to tell them, because there are horrible stories we have seen. If Dr. Prashant also can contribute later in today, and then we can definitely have a lot of discussion on it, maybe in some other occasion. Lot of problems with conflict. We have seen multiple crazy stories about it. As I told, there is a decrease in intentional and frauds related to the publication because of strict ethical review, strict peer review activities. I'll give you one example when there could be unintentional and error that can take place. These are 4 boxes. You can easily make out 2 into 2 table where any of the publication ethics breaches could be unintentional or intentional. So unintentional, and it could be just because of a chance, could be something inadequate records, not maintain proper records, and there may be some data missing. And authors are very clearly saying that these data are missing. For example, you can have a look at this. We have been using the same databases. Our new results were implausible. They are not in line with the current scientific findings. I found we had failed to load 8 files to the dataset. This is an error. Authors are committing for it, and we give a chance to the author to add those databases, reanalyze and send it. This is just an error, and data fabrication is a fraud. Keep this thing in mind. Okay, so that comes in the last column of this 2 into 2 box, which is intentional, and it is done for the reason that they want to achieve something from their particular research. And this was a study that was conducted across the world by the PLOS group of journals, and this is a common scenario of various publication ethics, breaches or problems associated with that. Like potential competing interest was the commonest one. Authorship was numbers are not mentioned in the original papers also, but majority of them are related to the conflict of interest, which I was talking to you. And authorship, as I told, is an evergreen topic. So whenever we are doing publication, please keep these things in mind. This is called as publication ethics checklist, and it is a summary slide for my presentation also. So please keep in mind whether do you have approval for relevant regulatory authorities like DCGI, CTRI when you are conducting the trials, or it could be institutional ethics committee. And have you registered your clinical trial, and have you documented informed consent? And data accuracy, falsification and fabrication, whether there is any manipulation in the data, or whether the data accuracy has been double checked or not. And is there lurking fake data? Plagiarism and self-plagiarism, have you written your own papers? Have you cited your own papers multiple times? Have you cited your papers, papers downloaded or papers referred correctly? Do you have written permission for reproduced materials, figures and tables? This is another problem that we usually face. Take copy and paste some figure from somewhere and put it in the article. So we need to have permission for that. Okay. And submission fraud is a paper simultaneously submitted to 2 journals. Have you published the entire work or a part of it, or we call it as salami slicing? Have you excessively cited your own publications? And ethics of authorship, have you included all authors in a specific pre-agreed order, and everyone have had a look at final manuscript that is submitted to journal? Do you have agreement with co-authors, and are the co-authors aware of the content of publication? Have they had access and hold themselves responsible for it? And is there any ghost author or a guest author? and conflict of interest. All these components, you self-check yourself. And if all these things are not there and you are completely satisfied with your paper, you can definitely submit the paper and be professionally satisfied that you have completely followed publication ethics. And what are the consequences for misconduct? I have already told one consequence. Authors can be blacklisted. It could be a major or a minor. Authors can be blacklisted from the journal, and sometimes institutions are blacklisted, and institutions themselves take action against the authors. We have seen multiple incidences of this kind. We need to have our institution hold responsible for whatever papers that go out of the institution. So consequences are not centralized. So it is all dependent on the institution. The journals will ask author to withdraw the papers. And withdrawing the paper because of ethical violation is a very, very bad thing. It is a kind of what we call embarrassment to the author as well as institution. And sometimes institution can withhold their promotion, withhold the further grants. Okay, funding agencies may withhold their publications, their funding opportunities. So these are many problems, multiple problems, but not everything very channelized. But it is, we need to take some stringent actions later. Okay, so we need to create a social conditions favoring ethical standards, have a better mentor model for good behavior, teach your students about ethical practices, and we should spend more time with our students in conducting ethical research and publishing it. And we should not post pressure on our students that they need to bring the results which I desire. And promotion should not be based on the number of papers, it should be based on the quality of papers. That's what our university is very aptly following. And contrary views have to be accepted, and integrity needs to be nurtured. So for this presentation, I have referred to guidelines. One is ICMR policy on research integrity and publication ethics, and committee on publication ethics guidelines. So you can definitely have a look at these guidelines and have better idea about the publication ethics. I urge all of you to have quality publications, ethical publications. At the same time, publications are important. Thank you so much.
A clear insight into the ethics has very well been presented by Dr. Praveen. Congratulations, sir. May I now request Dr. Priyanka to share her views and also to moderate the session.
Thank you, Dr. Chanchala. As usual, excellent presentation, sir. I am happy to be here as your reflection panelist. Now, ethics, as I understand, compasses of multiple core values like morality, trust, honesty, integrity, responsibility, reliability, and having principles. Now, the great authority on human evolution, Edwin Grant Conklin, he has told that ethics is the religion of science. And ethics, research, education, they all go hand in hand, because we require an education for a better future where we can help the future to increase their intellectual, where the character is formed, where the strength of mind is increased because of all these core values. Now, coming to Sir's presentations, just a summary on essentials of publication ethics. Sir spoke about the tools, or rather before he spoke about what are the ethical components which are needed in publication, what are the tools which we can prevent, or which can be used to prevent the wrongs which happen in the course of research. So Sir spoke about why we require to publish, whether it is for excellence in research, whether to advance professionally, whether it's for personal satisfaction, to contribute to the field, and all those things. And he also said that the high quality of research is very important, because ultimately our research, our contribution to the research field will somewhere. So Sir spoke about the high quality. Why is it important? Because ultimately the research, whatever we get from the research, ultimately it impacts the society as a whole. So we also spoke about scientific misconduct, where we can find it, whether it is at the local level or at the researcher level, institution level, public or patient level. We also spoke about publication bias. Sir spoke about publication ethics, which includes breach in the confidentiality, fabrication, falsification, criteria for authorship, the conflict of interest being it social, personal or financial, plagiarism, and ethics which are related to submission. Now, all these are important, and Sir also spoke about how we can prevent all this. And Sir spoke about the prevalence of the problems in publication, such as because of the strict guidelines followed in the research community, the need for the overseeing of the research has made sure that such kind of unethical practices are also decreased. Sir also spoke about the ethical checklist, which is important, and the consequences of all these research misconduct, they were also spoken. Sir also in the end gave a summary wherein he says that for our future, we need to provide a condition or an environment where research is to be conducted ethically. Because ultimately, they say in this digital world, the core values of ethics are something which will help shape our future. Because without ethics, the science or research will ultimately just be a cruelty, that's all. So thank you so much, sir, for a wonderful presentation. And I thank you all the organizing committee members for giving me an opportunity to be the reflection panelist for Dr. Praveen Kulkarni. Good day, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks for a very apt summary.
Yes, thank you for your inputs, Dr. Priyanka. Can you please moderate the session too? I see 4 questions in the question box.
Yes. Yeah, sure. The first question is, if the research is innovative or true, and if it is rejected, what could be the reason?
The reasons could be many. The reasons have to be answered by the reviewers. Okay, they will be usually giving you an idea why the paper has been rejected. Okay, so something which could be innovative to me may not be innovative to someone else. So what decides an innovation, and whether that is really related to that particular journal or not? There are many reasons for rejection. Let us not go into that rejection component of the paper. And we need to really, usually author reviewers or the publishers will give you an idea, editors will give you an idea why the paper has been rejected. Okay, so it is again a publication ethics that whenever, I think Prashant sir is here, he will definitely endorse me. Whenever we are rejecting paper from our journal, we strictly quote the reasons. I used to reject it without giving the reasons. He's the one who taught me, whenever you are rejecting a paper, give 4 or 5 reasons, solid reasons why you are rejecting the paper. That is the one which will definitely help the authors also to decide on future publication.
The next question is, should the study results having opposite findings of all the previous studies and having less evidence be rejected or considered as new innovations?
I have already touched upon it as a part of publication bias. If the findings are contrary to the current scientific knowledge, there could be, we need to have a very exhaustive review process. And if the research has been conducted with all proper precautions or proper measures in methodical manner, and in spite of that, if the results are contrary, there should not be any problem in publishing it. If the research is conducted correctly, then research is conducted in an ethical manner, methodically, there should not be problem in publishing the paper. It should not be rejected for the reason that the results are contrary in spite of the entire methodology being correct.
The next question is, what is the importance of null hypothesis in studies?
Ma'am, I think I have already told null hypothesis is a part of every study. You are going to reject the null hypothesis so that you are going to accept your research hypothesis or alternative hypothesis. And whenever you are doing analytical studies or you are doing experimental studies, null hypothesis is a starting point of any research. Okay, so we have to clearly state it. If we are doing what we call clinical trials or analytical study, it should be very explicitly mentioned in the research paper.
Okay, so one more question is, can you please share a document which will tell us when we need to take an ethical clearance? And when
this is from Dr. Kusuma. I'll definitely send it to her. I think I can share it with the organizers only. You can definitely have a look at it, and it is also available online. ICMR guidelines for human and animal studies. So you can definitely I'll definitely share with Dr. Kusuma, because a lot of lab related data has to be published and she wants to know about it. I will will share it with the organizers only. You can share it with all the participants.
And
Thank you, sir.
another question is, what are the rules when writing a review paper?
So all review paper rules are already, usually the journals themselves give you the guidelines for writing the review papers. Okay. So it depends on the type of journal. And every journal will have their own way of, some things will be common across all, and many journals will have the specifications. Whenever we are writing the review papers, read the specifications properly and then write the review papers. So that will satisfy most of the problems associated with that. We cannot copy and paste from the previous journals, and we should definitely paraphrase them and bring analysis and interpretation out of it.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir. Another, I think that's it. Those were the question and answers for this session.
Thank you, Dr.
Over to you.
Yeah, there was one question on salami slicing. I'll just take 1 minute to answer it. Salami slicing is nothing but, I'm seeing it in the chat box. Salami slicing is nothing but the same study is cut into bits and pieces and published. Let me give one example. There was a study conducted on the prevalence of under 5 nutrition, malnutrition among under 5 children in one particular rural community. So from this particular study, 4 papers would have been published. Number 1, socio-demographic characteristics of under 5 children in a rural community. Second, prevalence of malnutrition among under 5 children. Number 3, factors influencing malnutrition among under 5 children. 4, factors associated with dietary consumption among under 5 children. All these 4 are 4 objectives and all are published as different papers. But base remains same. The methodology remains same. This is called a salami slicing. Cutting the paper into bits and same project into bits and pieces and publishing it at different journals.
Okay, so I have a question about self-citation. As you said, for grants, they prefer us to have certain publications in that particular field. And in case I have done certain research and I have done so much of publication, wouldn't it be unfair if I don't cite it, because I have done so much of research in that field and I am quoting my own this thing. It is not because it is mine, it is because that I have done so much of study.
Definitely,
so
you are definitely right. So self-citation, there should be some cutoff for it. If I have done multiple studies on rabies, means only my studies have to be, it means that you are not finding out something out of box, what others have done. We are doing everything and I am putting my own thoughts, but others would have been doing ways in a different manner. Different things would have been evolved from different people. If I am doing, citing from my own papers and without referring to the other people who have worked on the same area, then it becomes again a jack in a box. So in that context, to get the perspectives of others also, I am talking it in terms of publications, but not in terms of protocols, proposals submitted. In proposals, if you cite your references as a part of your work, the reviewers will be more happy for it because you have done so much of work associated with that. But at the same time, you need to have others also into your reference list. That will add more value to it.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Dr. Praveen. Chanchala, can I just go?
Yes, ma'am.
Do we have time? Yeah. Dr. Praveen, when we are using biomarkers in our scientific research, even then, will it be considered as a salami slice? Because there are so many biomarkers which we would have used and it will have different implications. But you have included it in one study. So.
Yeah. No, if you have 10 biomarkers and if you write 10 papers for each of the biomarkers, it is a self-citation. It is a salami slicing. Yes. If you put the related biomarkers together and write papers, that will not be qualifying for salami slicing.
That clarification. Yeah. Because if it is like related to 3 different things.
Yeah, 3 different things, 3 different set of biomarkers, you publish it. That is not a problem. Yeah. But if you put 10 to make 10 different papers for 10 different biomarkers, it will be a problem.
Okay, thank you so
much. Thank you. Further queries, I think, can be answered via email.
Definitely.
To catch up with time as well. As part of this session, there are a few MCQs that are posted on your screen. I request the participants to kindly fill in, which may take about 2 to 3 minutes. I request Dr. Praveen to kindly accept our token of appreciation in the form of a certificate. Thank you for your contribution, sir.
Thank you so much.
And to our panelist, Dr. Priyanka, for her valuable inputs.
Thank you.
Thank you once again, Dr. Praveen and Dr. Priyanka, for being a part of this webinar series.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Dental College. Thanks, Priyanka ma'am. Thanks, Dr. Bhagyalakshmi and Dr. Ashwini for all your help. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, the organizing committee members.
Thank you, Dr. Priyanka.